Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ETH Prague. Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here to ETH Prague, the studio audience, and also to welcome all the viewers on the live stream. Hi, Mom. I'm going to start off and kick off this ETH Prague set of presentations. We've got a lot of great presentations coming, live stream interviews throughout the day and throughout the weekend. But to start off, we're going to go to Andrej Berlin, who's going to talk about first principles for DAO design. Please give it up for Andrej.
Thank you so much for having me. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll try to narrate a mental model for how decentralized organizations can look, and then I'll guide you through a couple of principles and guidelines on how to actually approach designing organizations that are permissionless, autonomous, and in theory also infinitely scalable. And then I'll go into a little bit of how that can look in the future. Before I start, I just want to thank everybody who, first of all, everybody who's here and who's listening, but also everybody who has been contributing to Deep Work, which is a design studio that I built. Because without these people, the research that I'm basing the following presentation on would not have been possible. They're kind of live actors in a system that helped understand how these things can work. Nobody has contractual obligations, and yet over the last 4 years, we have together designed over 40 different products, some of which you are probably very familiar with. Before the Middle Ages, work was considered as something that was just an integral part of life, so people would just sleep, work, eat. In the Middle Ages, Christian chauvinists combined the idea of work with the concept of being a good person. So if you do the work, you receive money. Profits go to the church distributes it to the poor people. That's a good thing in the eyes of God, so you're a good person. That same mental framework translated in the industrialization, except for factory work, so you were basically in a well-functioning society if you're a working person, whether you like it or not. And that concept is still used by neo-economists to explain how the economy works, because, again, regardless of whether people like working or not, is seen as kind of a necessity or disutility even to afford leisure. And then obviously people buy things and the economy flourishes, and that seems to be a reasonable way to explain it. The reason why I'm preempting the presentation with that, or why I'm saying this, is because I don't think that we can build organizations that are based on the principles that people don't like working if we want to achieve behaviors that are goal-directed in order to solve all the problems that we're working on. I think that people generally like working on stuff as long as it's meaningful, as long as they see the purpose of it, as long as they see an opportunity for collaboration, and as long as they feel fairly compensated. And I think that's kind of where any organization at any stage has to start with. So not just like what you're interested in, what you want to be doing, but also like what's the value behind it. And then obviously who are you designing, who are you building stuff for? Who are you creating this value for? And then only you go into creating a business model around that. And that also helps you to avoid the fallacy of seeing your organization as a kind of a competitive race and like being better than someone else, because it's not. And we can see that on online communities, for example. Online communities flourish because people just gravitate towards certain content and they like it, and they don't think that some information or some knowledge is better than in a different forum. I mean, I think we can also generally learn quite a lot from online communities, because they also build out this very rich network of profiles that shows who people are before you actually have to get to talk to them. Obviously, on the other hand, we also need to think about kind of profitability of a business. And I think that this combination of these two things is what we're looking for. And it would probably manifest itself in giving people the autonomy and freedom to work on whatever they want, whenever they want to work on these things, the ability to still have financial stability, like in a payroll job, but also have the opportunity to get into an organization and leave it at any point in time, and actually have the possibility to be excluded from that organization at any point in time, because that's like a social driver. But also we need to make sure that organizations are as transparent as possible about everything, so that people can actually do the work and then gather reputation and have portable reputation. So this is already kind of going not really technical, so I'm not talking about like how to use Snapshot or multisigs or something. In fact, I don't think that DAOs really exist yet in that way, or that is kind of a reasonable way to describe a DAO. I think maybe the only one is like Bitcoin. But I think if we focus on certain aspects of work and we manage to decentralize them and automate some others, we can get to a model of organizations that closely mimics the way that biological organisms work. And there's excellent research from my friends from block science on the so-called viable system model. You should look it up. It's very applicable to any organization at any stage to make it resilient and adaptable. So in order to start designing organizations, I think we need to make an assumption that time, or chronological time, is not an adequate measure for work. And we can see that also, like I think last week in the UK, 70 companies or so reduced the working week to 4 days without lowering the pay. That makes it obvious that the quality of the work is not really represented by the time spent. And we also have things like hour tracking, where people just don't like tracking their hours, for example, or they overestimate. So that also doesn't seem to be a reasonable way to measure work. But I think that if we look at work as kind of project-based work, but with very, very specific conditions or like properties, which is a very specific outcome, a process how to achieve that outcome, and the duration that it takes to achieve that outcome, then things become a lot easier. This is how also Deep Work started. So we started offering kind of design services, but not in like a nebulous way, but we were very specific. We said, only 7 days, this is exactly the outcome, here's exactly the process. And you can also do that with basically any type of work. It's not easy, but you scope it out, and then you calculate the amount of hours from the team that it takes to achieve that particular outcome. You compare that to the market rate of the person, and you actually then have a cost. And that cost you can negotiate with either an external party or an internal stakeholder. And of course, I know that people have different perspectives on what a project is, but I think you can learn a lot from design thinking tools popularized by IDEO. So also something I would really recommend if you want to align teams on something that seems very difficult to align on. Design thinking offers a really good tool. But then with these projects, you basically can have like, you co-evolve them as you negotiate with your stakeholder what that consists of and what the value is. And I can't stress enough the kind of value of project-based work. So I know that it's kind of hard to specify all the things that we do into projects, but I think it offers a lot of really interesting opportunities and benefits. Like if you specify it, then you can pay people meritocratically. If you convert a work stream to projects, then you have feedback loops, so you can make sure that people improve over time. You have points where you can measure the outcomes a lot better, especially in a complex organization that becomes tricky. And you can use them in order to provide reputation to people, or like read out the reputation from people. As a side effect, an organization also becomes quite cost effective, because in economic uncertainty, you basically don't need to pay for the work that's not being done. You only focus on the things that have to be done. The other thing that I think is also important is that it can help you solve the problem of like onboarding or hiring new people. So I don't know at which stages your teams are or in which journeys you are, but there will be a stage where you need to hire people or introduce them to the organization. And if you have projects, and some progressive organizations actually do that quite well, where they let people work together on projects, so they mentor them in. But in combination with kind of an open project-based work, people know that the cost of firing or getting excluded from the organization is zero. So what they hold on to is not a contract. They hold on to the social relationships that they establish between, the mentors and mentees or students. students are willing to learn more and have more access to work. Mentors want to replace themselves or find some help. And as a consequence of that kind of relationship, you also see that people develop what we kind of externally call soft skills. So they develop management skills or project management, hiring, obviously, and and like education or mentorship. So because people actually kind of like working together, they tend to make all these relationships a lot more valuable. And also, especially with deep work, we can see that if someone brings new people in, then it's always someone who is kind of in a trusted network. So someone who's going to bring in good quality work as well. And by the way, none of this concept really requires like blockchain or Web3 technology per se. You can basically use existing no-code tools in order to build that together. So even deep work is built basically that way, and only now we're slowly introducing Web3-based tools. But and obviously you can introduce or like you can enhance it with tokens or with Web3 tools. Tokens have the ability to make people kind of feel shared or see the shared ownership of an organization, which is also a good example from OneHive where that works really well. But I think that still is very kind of useful to think about the organization as being a network of social relationships rather than people trying to kind of find the best candidate or the employee trying to find the best job and like kind of working on or like faking their CV or something. One thing that is relevant for that, or like that's also kind of a prerequisite for that, is that you're very clear about the roles and the work that's being done, and also kind of transparent about how to do it. So we created, for example, a very, very sophisticated documentation of the work and documentation of the roles. There are a lot of examples in a traditional space as well. I think like McKinsey was also one of the kind of most popular examples of having like high quality documentation, but it was locked in. And here you can make it transparent. So not only can you show the high quality standard of the work, but you can also make that kind of an attractor for people. So now you don't need to reach out to anyone. People just kind of gravitate towards the work because they want to do that. And also if it's like well described, you have a really nice way to already, like they can learn it before they start working on it.
That's just a liquor store.
I'll just skip that one. And so especially if the documentation or these primitives of projects and roles are public, you can use them kind of as data points or like as certain artifacts. So with dominance hierarchies, they become clear so people can traverse them, so they can understand what they want to learn next. You can create like conditional prerequisites for going to the next role. Or if you're using token-based governance or direct democracy, you can assign them specific weights if you think that one of the roles has a certain value that's higher than another, or like should contribute to the change of a particular organization, for example. And of course, because everything is open source, it also allows to do the things that you could do with open source software. So people can fork skills. You can fork a design studio now. You can create your own design studio if you wanted to, which is, I think, great because you'll see how a market can evolve and a lot more organizations can be created based on something that's already existing. Or people have the ability to improve what they're working on. This is very important if you don't want to avoid kind of micromanaging or middle managing, that if these things are transparent, if the roles and the processes are transparent, then people have the ability to improve on them. What they also obviously need is kind of the way to, oh yeah, sorry, I skipped that one, but it doesn't matter. What you also need to look at is the data that gets accumulated through that. So once you specify specific projects and roles, they're calculatable. So you can provide people with the data of what's actually going on inside the organization so they can make sense of how to behave, whether they should stick in the organization or whether they should spend their time maybe somewhere else. There's a so-called problem called overall problem in complexity science. It's also quite useful to think about, which basically explains how you can create an organization or a system in which you have an equilibrium of people contributing to the system. So let's say there's a limited amount of work and you want people to be exactly that same amount, then you have to provide them with as much data as possible throughout time, but also with enough data so that they can develop as many strategies as possible. And if you can do that with the work that is happening internally, then you basically have the ideal size. The people can decide in response to how the market evolves whether they should work in an organization or not. And the last thing that I want to quickly touch on is the portable reputation. Reputation has been locked in organizations so far because of kind of privacy concerns or competitive reasons. And I know that there's like LinkedIn or portfolios, self-attested portfolios. But if you have specified the exact roles, from the inside they look like roles, but from the outside they actually can be perceived as skills. And they're already verified by someone else because you are just doing the work in the organization. The organization is verifying that yes, you have that role, you have that skill. And to the public, you can see the quality standard of the organization, you can see the contribution, and it makes it kind of more trustworthy than the alternatives that we have. Of course, we need to make sure that people still own their data, so that they can only share the things that they want to be sharing, and this is something that's kind of, I think, currently evolving or will evolve more in the future, where we can use like zero-knowledge proofs or something to give people the ability to share only very specific data. So I think that generally the future of that is relatively kind of interesting if we assume that we get these data points, because based on those we can create essentially a marketplace of ways to work with roles and skills. So you can create certain skill trees or algorithms that predict what would be better to work on next, or have a much easier way to verify someone's skills, or like get a bank loan or something, do a KYC process. I think soul-bound tokens also kind of fit into that same area of requirements. So I hope that gave you kind of a quick or short summary of some of the principles that I can see in designing an organization. Obviously, this is non-exhaustive. Obviously, there's like billions of different things and much more granular things to think about. But yeah, covered things like the work is a meaningful part of life, project-based, so think about process, outcome, duration, mentorship, high-quality documentation that's public so everybody can see it, and obviously think about public portable reputation. I think the more organizations adopt these principles, the more we'll see a stability for people to work wherever they like financial stability and social stability, while retaining the flexibility of the organizations, or actually as a consequence of that flexibility, this stability will emerge. So yeah, if you're, obviously, again, there's like millions of different things. If you're interested in more, you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. I started posting a couple of videos that are very kind of low-key and explaining some of these concepts more. And yeah, thank you so much for your interest in design, and I wish you a beautiful rest of the conference. Thank you.